Okay, and welcome everyone to another special edition of the DNN Community Hangout. And I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, Will Stroll. Will, good to see you again, man.
That's me. Hey, Joe. It's been like a whole week or something.
Yeah, but these are getting to be fairly regular. We're doing these special hangouts. So what's up with that?
Well, people need information, right? We got some cool, exciting stuff coming up, and not the least of which is this stuff is relating to money, right?
Money? What do you mean by money? I don't
Our
know.
module contest. Our module contest.
Module content. Oh, that? Yes.
Yeah, that thing I already won.
Well, I was just talking to Peter Donker this morning, and he said he already won. So I'm not. You may have to talk with Peter.
Well, I'll be sure to contribute a pull request that makes that go away.
Well, Peter already beat you the pull request this morning, so you may have to do 2 pull requests.
Well, that's fine. Those are easy. Now.
That's for another session.
Indeed.
So today, last week we talked about DNN 8 SPA module development, and this week we're going to talk about DNN 8 MVC module development. So let me go ahead and share out my screen here, and you're going to keep me honest through this whole thing, right, Will?
I am. In fact, and the first part of being honest is I have some follow-up questions from the last the SPA hangout from some folks. So the first question was, there was a blog post out there that Charles put out there for tokens for the SPA module development pattern, but it appears that not all the tokens are there. Are we going to have those in the quick start guide for DNN 8?
We are. So there are a number of tokens that should already be functioning. And we will have additional tokens that are working. I'm not sure what specific tokens that they think aren't there currently, but we shouldn't have any problems with what's out there already. As far as I know, and I've tried a lot of the different tokens, as far as I can see, all of the tokens have been working for me. So it may be a particular version of DNN 8 they're using. But in the DNN 8 CDP 6, which is what I'm basing all of my development on, all the tokens are there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so what it sounded like from the question I got was that we showed tokens that aren't on the blog, but if they're going to be on, we'll make sure they get onto the wiki then.
Yes, for sure. We will be updating documentation and content here very shortly. We actually have a whole project around documentation for DNN 8 that we're kicking off. So all of the content that we're talking about in SPA and MVC, Dynamic Content Creator, all of that will be documented as part of that documentation project.
Cool. The other questions I have are actually, they're not for last Hangout. The rest of the questions I have are questions I already got for today's Hangout. So I think we can get started.
Look at that, doing show prep before the show. I'm impressed.
I always do that, but that's all I'll say about that.
Touche, sir. Touche. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we're just going to do a couple of slides here just to sort of orient people. Nothing really dramatic in terms of content on the slides today. We really want to spend most of our time in code. So sort of when we talk about MVC modules and talk about the MVC module type, it's important to understand why we're building out MVC modules, right? Like, what was wrong with web forms? Why wouldn't we want to use just web forms and continue doing that? And really the biggest reason is that MVC is something that we are seeing more and more that customers not only want, but we've got some customers who are demanding it. And some customers saying, basically, if I don't have a method to do MVC development, I have to find another platform. And so that's something that's very important for us. It's very important for our customers as well. And so we want to make sure that we give them a great first-class MVC experience. The other part of this is, like with SPA development, we want this to be seamless with DNN development. And as we go through today, I think you'll see that we've done a fairly good job, or what I think is a fairly good job, of integrating MVC in a way that the line between where MVC starts and stops is kind of blurred with DNN, and it really just becomes a native part of developing modules for DNN. Now, right, today, we're only talking about module development. We're not talking about handlers or modules in the traditional IIS sense, or any other type of a DNN extension, but we're just focused on modules. And the reason we did that is because modules are traditionally where most of your UI and most of your development actually for DNN occurs. You know, there are some other areas where you might do where you might develop a provider or something else that's not a module, but for this release, all of our development is focused on module development, since that truly is where the bulk of your development time is spent when you're developing for DNN. So like with SPA, we have some pieces that feel very native to MVC, but that are actually integration pieces with DNN. And there are some pieces that, if you're familiar with DNN development, MVC development should not feel completely foreign to you, especially if you've ever used the model view presenter framework, which we've had in DNN for quite a few years. So with that, so what is MVC development? So MVC uses the ASP.NET MVC framework to actually create DNN modules. You don't require web forms. The interesting thing is that although web forms aren't required, you can mix and match. You can use MVC inside the same module that's using ASP.NET web forms, which is really interesting, right? You can have one view being served up by MVC, one view that's web forms. You could even have a third view that's using SPA framework, right? And so that's really gives you kind of a very integrated, very seamless movement between the three different module types, and it really makes it so that you can use each one where it makes most sense for your module. The other thing is that, as I was saying before, the points of integration that we use with MVC module is really around the Razor script helper tags. So with MVC, the default view engine is Razor, and we leverage that within DNN, and then create our own helper tags or helper functions to allow you to access some DNN specific information and DNN specific functionality from within your Razor view. So, and then also obviously we have our web API framework, our web services framework using web API 2 that you can also use and leverage for calling into DNN. So a great example of an MVC module type is in DNN 8 in the new dynamic content viewer. So if you remember last week when we were talking about SPA module types, the dynamic content type manager, which is an administrative feature, was built using the SPA module. So what we've done is basically within our dynamic content creator functionality, given you an example of both a SPA module and an MVC module. And that's really important for people when they're coming into DNN and they want to see how to build these things. You don't have to go hunting around on the internet looking for examples or sample modules or what have you. You can really just open up the core DNN and get two great sample modules right out of the box. Of course, there will be other samples that are built. In fact, that's the whole goal and purpose of the DNN 8 module challenge, is to help get some of that content seeded by community members. But also we'll have an MVC template that we'll submit for Chris Hammond to include in his Chris Talk templates. So,
well, that's one of the questions that I have. That's a follow-up question. Some people are very eager to find out where we are with that.
So I've completed, and by completed, I mean I have a fully working function or a fully working example of the SPA module template. And so I'm going to be submitting that to Chris this week. The MVC module template, I need a couple more days on that. I'm just getting started with that. So that one's a little bit further behind, but that one will be out in the next week or so.
Awesome.
So my commitment is to make sure we've got the SPA module one done and submitted over to Chris by the weekend, and the MVC done by the time I leave California next week. Okay. Okay, awesome. But what we're going to see today is that that you don't actually need, again, to have a separate template. That we should be able to just start from Chris Hammond's templates and convert over to MVC without much effort at all, right? There are a few things that we have to know, a few things that we have to do. Just like we did last week, we started with Chris Hammond's templates and made the modifications that we needed to actually turn it into an MV or a SPA module. This week, we're going to start with Chris Hammond's template again, and we're going to turn it into an MVC module. Now, I may not go all the way through every single step this week, just in the interest of time. I would rather be able to dive into some deeper code rather than generating a bunch of boilerplate. So we'll talk about the basic steps here, and then we'll dive over into the DNN platform code and look at an actual working example. That way I'm not too worried about whether or not did I mistype something or do I have something wrong in IIS. I really want to be able to get to the working example this time rather than being focused too much on typing a bunch of code. So let's start with Chris Hammond's template. So this, I pre-installed this earlier. If you really want to see where to get that and everything about Hammond's templates, watch last week's episode or last week's Hangout on SPA module. We covered that in that module. And so now I've got it installed. I've created a new project from Chris Hammond's template called a DNN MVC module. This actually is going to be the template that we ultimately ship. You can see here I've got the one for SPA module already done. And so now we need to start modifying it. So if you remember back last week, what we did with the SPA module template is we went, and it's a question of, right, if you think about the way SPA module or modules in DNN are defined, the most important part is not really the script. So database stuff stays pretty much the same, whether we're talking SPA, MVC, or web forms, or resource files, the same. Where we start getting into differences is in how we define modules, and specifically how we define a module control, right? So a module control, this basically says, how do I render UI on the screen for DNN? And so when we're rendering here, we're going to have a slightly different way that we do this control source. So let's do a couple of things before we get there. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to add a couple of what do you call it? Folders to our project. Now I've actually already created these folders, so I'm going to go ahead and just add them into my project. So I've got one here called View. I've got another one here called Models, and I've got another one here called Controllers. Ironically, they're the same views or the same folders that MVC comes from, right? So models, views, and controllers. So all of that is basically standard boilerplate. If you've done MVC development before, you know where all of these are. If you've only done DNN development, it's not really rocket science. The important ones are the controllers and the views, because MVC framework itself knows where those things are at. And so as a result, we tend to stick to the MVC conventions as closely as we possibly can, wherever we can.
So Joe, when we say we're sticking to the conventions, when we have these folders in our project, is that more of sticking with conventions for familiarity, or does the framework require that of us?
It's for familiarity.
Okay.
Almost everything in MVC, a lot like DNN, you have control over, but in order to start making some of those changes, you have to go and do some configuration at startup for MVC. Part of the challenge is if you do that, then you're likely to break somebody else's module because they may not be following that same convention, right? And MVC typically changing conventions means changing conventions for the entire application. And even though we're working on a single module, it's really part of a larger application. So if you go start mucking with the MVC configuration, it really means that all the modules have to follow that same configuration, right?
So the way I'll translate that for everybody else is use these folder names.
Yes, use the folder names. Yes, use the standard MVC conventions, and things will work well. If you go outside of that, it really takes someone who knows what they're doing and understanding the repercussions of that. That's way beyond what we can cover in this hour-long session here. So, yeah, use these names. So there's a couple of things about MVC, specifically around MVC views, that we'll talk about here. One of them is the ability to have shared or standard layout, right? So every time we build a view, we don't always want to have to be wiring up the same bits. There may be, for every view in our MVC module, there may be different bits that we want to show that are standard, right? So header, footer, navigation elements within our module. So sometimes those are going to be shared, right? And the way you do that within MVC is inside this shared folder, you have something called a layout.
Are you able to zoom in on that at all, Joe? Do you have a zoom tool?
Yes, I do. Of course I do. Yeah.
See if it works with Google Hangout first. I don't think your Zoom tool and Google Hangout agree with each other. So maybe we won't have that.
So let's see if I can do it a different way. How about that?
That's much better. Yes. Okay. So now everybody will be able to read what you're looking at now.
Yeah. See, so I can zoom multiple ways. So
this Hangout.
So we've got our views. We've got a shared folder inside of that, and we've got this thing called layout.layout.cshtml. And the only thing that's in that view is basically it just says, give me a container, and I'm going to use the model that's going to be passed into this view and the module ID. So effectively, I'm going to end up with MVC container dash whatever my module ID is. And that just makes sure that this div is completely separate and uniquely identified from any other module that gets dropped on the page that may be built using MVC. You don't have to do this. It's just like a good practice so that you can make sure that you can reference this module's content. And then we're just going to render the body. So this render body, that's pretty standard boilerplate MVC stuff. And I'm not gonna try to teach you MVC today, but I really want to just show you how MVC and DNN play together, right? So this model.module ID is coming from DNN. There's render body, the standard part of Razor script and standard part of MVC. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll include some MVC stuff in the show notes so that way people can figure out MVC if they haven't touched it before.
So the other part, so that gives me a layout. And the thing is about MVC is you can actually have multiple layouts within your application, within your MVC application. So you can define in your specific views and say, I want to use this layout. But if you have a layout that you're using in all of your views, you can actually define another snippet here that basically says, and it's in that root of the views page, right? So we're in views, underscore view start. And this will now say the layout I want to use on every view as my default layout is this, right? So desktop modules, blah, 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 underscore layout. So this will make sure that every view I write will automatically get this layout unless inside my view, I give it a different layout. So I would do inside my view, I might do, you know, layout 2 or layout 3 if I wanted a custom layout for that particular item. But by default, I don't have to say anything because I've defined it here in my view start. So one thing to notice as and something important to point out as we're drilling down into this, notice the path where this module is being created. And this is important. It's in desktop modules, MVC. And then, so let me go over to DNN platform and pull up this, because what we're going to see, and let me make sure, if we go into desktop modules, I don't have it. Show all files. I'm not seeing my other.
There's an MVC folder there.
Oh yeah, it's in the MVC folder. That's where I want to go. Yeah.
Don't forget to zoom in.
Yep. Right. So in desktop modules, in the MVC folder, we actually ship another web config file in this MVC folder. And the reason we do that is specifically so that we can set a page-based type. So out of the box, MVC and the view page is looking for, like, how do I know what to use to render a view page? And out of the box, you know, Razor's got its own base page type. But in order to extend this for DNN, we had to define our own page type with some, and then we defined some standard namespaces that go with that. But this is the part, if we didn't do this in the MVC folder and add this web config in there for you, then you would have had to make some modification. You would have had to create this web config inside your module, and every module would have had to remember to do this, right? So we tried to do it in a way that we could hide this requirement from users as long as they follow the convention and put the module inside that MVC folder, right? So this is an example of where we know that this requirement exists for this web config to be done, so we can tell the system to use DNN's base page. But how do we do that in a way so that it doesn't complicate module development for developers too much, right? So just remember, stick your module inside the MVC folder and then go from there. Treat this, if you will, as your desktop modules folder, which means, like, so this is in platform. So you'll see here that I've got under MVC, I've got DNN, which is my organization name. And then I've got a module, so the dynamic content viewer, which is the module name, right? So just like I have DNN up here with dynamic content type manager, remember this one is created in SPA and this one is created in MVC. So this one has to go in that MVC structure. This one can just go in the normal desktop modules folder.
Now, when we look at the web config, Joe, because we're doing something very similar for hotcakes, because we already have the native MVC ourselves. So one of the reasons we have to do this is not just because of, you know, to make things apparent to the system, but it's also to allow us to have IntelliSense. So our developer, people building against our module can get that IntelliSense when they're building something. Does this give them that same kind of experience?
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
Okay. So with that, so now we understand, you know, the sort of where we're at with the base views. So great, I've got my view here. I don't need to save this. So now we're basically all set. We're ready to start creating views and start creating our controllers, right? So I would typically come up here. I would add a new controller and say the controller I want is going to be the view controller. So I would come in here, I would create a new MVC controller. I would make it empty. I don't really need a whole bunch of stuff in there. And I might call it, we're just going to call it MVC controller for the moment. It's not really that important. Oh, great. I'm getting another. We had this same Visual Studio bug last week, so I'm just not going to worry about it for the moment. So typically what I would do at this point is I would create a controller, I would create the associated view, and I would create my model. My model is how do I transfer database or data around, and how do I access data on the underlying system. So rather than go through all of these shenanigans here, let's talk about this control source now, because we're going to go from this, and then we're going to go over and look at the actual working code, which I know is working, as long as Visual Studio, the other Visual Studio, didn't crash. So the one thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to figure out, this is an ASCX, which we obviously are not going to have in our new system. So what does this control source need to look like? And when you think about this from an architectural perspective, right? So what is a module control? What is that thing actually trying to get for us? So in the web form scenario, traditional DNN development, right? That's an ASCX, right? If you look at that, it's saying, hey, when you render out this ASCX, and that will build the UI, right? This ASCX knows how to pull in the back-end code. It knows how to then, that back-end code then knows how to talk to the database, right? So this is sort of the entry point for defining what's going to get rendered on the page. When we did SPA module development last week, our entry point was HTML, right? And what we did here is we basically created a view.html, right? And we said, okay, this is now how we enter the module. And notice I didn't have to touch anything else in this module definition. I just changed where that view is. I just changed, I just said, instead of using the ASCX, use an HTML page and use that as your view source. In that HTML, we had JavaScript, which the JavaScript is like our code behind, and that code behind and that JavaScript knows how to make the appropriate server-side calls. In the case of HTML, it uses AJAX to make that call, or rather, in the case of JavaScript, it uses AJAX to make that call. In the case of ASCXs, it uses code behind. But in the in the MVC world, things are a little bit different, right? In the MVC world, our entry point is not through an ASCX or what is traditionally called a front controller. It's through the controller itself, and the controller is then responsible, excuse me, for determining what view to load, and also for determining how to get the appropriate data in the data model to display my UI. So instead of saying this is the view to use, what we're going to say is this is the controller that you use, and based on that controller, the controller knows how to load up data and how to load up a view. Okay, is that clear there?
Yeah, I got that. I do have a question from before you transition to that. You kind of transitioned pretty quickly. You had a bug that you ran into with Visual Studio, and I happen to know you're using Visual Studio 2015. Is that something that other people are going to be running into?
I honestly don't know. I run into it occasionally. It has nothing, as far as I can tell, I don't know that it's necessarily DNN specific. I've run into this a number of times in Visual Studio 15, so I think it's a Visual Studio 15 bug more than anything, or it could be the, I'm running a number of add-ons to Visual Studio, so, it could be any of those.
Yeah, and another question is, that I know everybody else is asking. I think I already know the answer to this one though. Is I'm stuck on Visual Studio 2012. Can I still do this?
Yes, you could still do this even in Visual Studio 2012, but what I would say is, you know, unless your enterprise has a hard and fast requirement that you can't install stuff on your machine, there is a Visual Studio 2015 Community Edition that is available for free for you to do open source development and for you to do actually development in general, as long as it's not for commercial purposes, right? If it's not for a large enterprise, if you're a small company, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, I think you can still use it for commercial purposes. But if you're a enterprise, then I think you have to have a license for that. But so you can, most people, like there are not going to be many people in our community who are not able to get Visual Studio 2015. But 2012, you should still be able to do MVC development. What I don't know is whether or not MVC 5 is accessible from 2012. I think it is, so I don't think there should be any problem there. It's not a DNN requirement that you have a 2015 at this point.
Sounds good.
Okay. So rather than coming back here, I'm just going to close this Visual Studio out because we're kind of done here. Everything that we're going to do from here on out is just basically create more models, create more views, create more controllers. And if you want to see how to do that, I would say go to ASP.NET and look at some of the documentation around MVC, because all of this is exactly the same, right? So let's instead go over and look at DNN platform, and let's go ahead. So that's the web config. So let's go ahead and look here, and I'm just going to go up here to the dynamic content viewer, right? So it's under DNN platform modules. If you're in the DNN platform solution. So the dynamic content viewer is again an MVC module, and you'll notice there's nothing special about it until we get down here to this module control here at the bottom. And so the important bits to notice here now is that we have some really strange looking items here. So in this case, we have what looks like a namespace, mostly because it is a namespace. And that namespace corresponds to a namespace that's here in my code. So if you were to go in here into the controllers, right? Because remember, this is now going to be, we're trying to define where that controller is that I need to use. Okay. So I've got my controllers here, and if I look in my controllers, and I were to open one of these up, this is my namespace. So the namespace is there. The second part of that that we had was, so I've got my namespace. What specific controller do I need? So I need the viewer controller, right? So I'm in this namespace, I'm getting the viewer controller. And then the last item is, what actual action do I want to call here, right? So the action is really your module controller or your MVC controller endpoint. Where am I specifically calling into? We use the .mvc to tell DNN that, hey, this is an MVC control or controller. This is not HTML. This is not a web forms user control, but rather this is an MVC controller, right? So if I look in my viewer controller, I should see something called index in here. And if I go down far enough, there should be one right there, right? And so now effectively what I've done is I've said for this module control, when you need to render this, basically call this action on this controller in this namespace. Make sense?
Yes. How much of that is like new? Like if I've already done a module development, or excuse me, if I've already done MVC development, how much of the understanding of how that gets wired up will I already be comfortable with?
So that will be new to you, right? So the whole idea of the manifest is new to you to begin with, right? So this this here is going to be new to you because this is unique to DNN. But the idea that you have a namespace, a controller, and an action is standard MVC stuff, right?
It's basically routing.
It's basically routing, right? And the reason we have to do this is because in MVC, typically you would define your own routes within MVC, and you would have a route that you've defined that says, this is how you get to my controllers, right? And then MVC is able to use that to figure out where your controller is and what endpoint to call, and to know that they have to call the index endpoint. Well, in DNN, because we use routing for web API and we have our own URL rewriter, and all of these other things, it just wasn't possible to merge in the traditional MVC routing system into DNN and just have that work. Now, under the covers, we are still using MVC routing or web routing, but it's using our own defined routes. We're a little more constrained. We're putting a box around this and saying, as long as your routes stay inside this box, it's going to be fine, right? And so that just makes sure that your module plays well with every other module in the system. If you looked at some of the earlier CTPs, we didn't actually have this controllers or the namespace here, and we found that what would happen is you would drop a couple of modules built with MVC on the page, and then they would blow up because it wouldn't know which viewer controller to call, right? Because you might have a couple of different viewer controllers to call, or you might have some other route so it would get confused. So we think with this, we're pretty well set, namespace, controller, and index. And again, notice we said viewer, we didn't say viewer controller, right? So that is an MVC very specific convention, right? So by convention, your controllers are always named XYZ controller. So same as web API, right? And then the system just assumes whatever name you use there, it's going to tap controller on the end, and that's how it's going to find this class.
Now, you made me think of another question here. So I have this module, and let's just give it a name. Let's say this is my task management module built in MVC, and I add that module to the page twice, that same exact module. How does that affect anything at all?
So that is why, if you remember, when we created our view, we want here, viewer. Oh, shared. That's where we are. All right. So that's why here we define this by module ID. So even though I've got multiple copies of this viewer on the same page, each one will be guaranteed to have a unique module ID, right? So I know that it's going to be segmented by that module ID. So each one gets its own context.
So for everybody watching, so basically, for the UI, we're scoping out the UI so it doesn't run into conflicts. But in the back end, in the controller, where we haven't really dove into yet, we have that active module context that allows us to make sure that we're scoped there for data and whatnot as well.
Right. So that's why we have this DNN controller rather than the traditional MVC controller, right? And if you were to go and look at what this DNN controller does, that's responsible for giving me my module specific context. That's also the one that's going to make sure I get the model that's specific to this instance of this controller, right? So that's how all of those things are wired up. So this DNN controller, just like we had a DNN API controller for web API or for the web services, we have a DNN controller for the MVC side. And so as a result of all of that, now we have a way to get to that specific module control, right? So now, oops. So now we can have our controller for MVC, we can have our HTML for our SPA and our ASCX. And again, just like we had last week with SPA, at any point in there, I could say this is for the first module control. My second module control might be an ASCX, and my third module control might be HTML, and it doesn't really matter. Okay. So that's really, so if we pull all of that together, now I'm not going to go too much further down into diving through code, because most of the rest of this code is really just can you get the module settings, get some content, right? And then he's calling back to where the underlying data comes from, right? So in my controller now, I'm getting some model information and passing it back. So there's not really a lot more here in terms of DNN specific stuff.
Well, some of that stuff that you're showing there is pretty standard, especially if you've done some web API stuff already in DNN with the active module and whatnot. How much of this do we need to know for loading up our own model, or do we have a model pattern that we have to follow, anything like that?
We don't have a model pattern. That's something I'm working through on the SPA template, because one of the challenges that I have, so the dynamic content viewer is actually, if you follow this, right? So if I go down here to the index, index, where did I go again? I think it's down here at the bottom. Process fields. Right here. Here we are, right? So all it's doing is it's looking, getting some information. This happens to be a template that we're going to render. It's getting some other template name and what have you. And then it's getting a content item from the database, and it's wiring it up, right? So now here's where it's adding some information to the view data. So traditional, if you've done MVC development, this is very familiar to you. And this content item that it's creating is actually the model that I wanted, right? So if I look in my models here, there's a settings model. The dynamic content item is actually coming from our content API system, but it is a model as well, right? And so what I'm saying is return this view that's already been defined with the content item. Now, because I haven't specifically named a view here, it knows to return the index view. So it's going to come in here and it's going to go to the index view because it's the same name as the action. Again, MVC convention over configuration. And it's going to return that view with this underlying data model, or this underlying model, right? So I'm trying not to confuse people with a lot of MVC stuff. If you're into MVC, this should look very familiar to you. If you're not into MVC, this may be Greek to you, but that's why I suggest going to ASP.net, and there's all kinds of learning material there for understanding how to build MVC applications, and then this will become, pretty straightforward for you.
Yeah, when I first started touching MVC, it did look very foreign because of all the by convention stuff. There's things that just worked and you weren't sure why, right? And so that was basically my biggest learning curve, is like, why does this work? So for anybody that hasn't gone through that already, know that it's not that big of a learning curve actually. And once you just start playing with it, it starts to make sense. Now, when we talk about these front end views, like the index CSHTML, what is the experience we can expect from a Razor standpoint?
Yeah, so again, they're traditional Razor templates. Now we have a couple of things here that are DNN specific, right? So we have, in this case, I'm saying, hey, this is the model that I have coming in. It's this thing. It's a dynamic content item type. Because this is part of the DCC, right? I'm wanting to render out my model. So here I have another DNN Razor helper that just says, now this is specifically for the DCC, because the DCC, again, is very much like MVC. It says, give me a template and give me a model, or give me a view and give me a model, and I'll render that out. So ironically, within MVC, we are employing another MVC type system that's using dynamic content for the underlying data structure. But so we have this template 4 extension, but you should be able to use all of your normal MVC extension methods as well. And I'm not sure why I'm not getting right. So we've got dynamic content has got some extension methods, and there are some others. What are those other? So anyway, there's
so we're getting some IntelliSense there. So
we're getting some IntelliSense. We're not getting everything I would expect. And we'll look into that and see where the other stuff is, right? Because
my experience, that's usually something that we fix at the web config level. Like there's something not wired up, or character wrong, or a version number off, or something. So with the front end, I had a follow-up question with that, but the IntelliSense threw me off.
Okay, there's one more piece I want to cover while we're here.
Sure.
We didn't really cover it too much last week. And it's a new part of the developer experience, and it's what we're calling quick settings. Let me see if I can.
Oh yeah.
Right page, right? And what is quick settings and how do we wire it up? So I want to, if I could get Firefox to cooperate with me here.
Well, while it's thinking, one of the things I do want to throw out there for people is like there's the SPA templates, right, that are going to be coming out and that you're going to be able to use in the SPA method of development. There's the MVC method development, and of course, in like we've said in both of these sessions that you can mix and match the controls in each of them, like have a SPA and ASCX and MVC in the same module. But even like when we talk about MVC, there's no reason why you can't do MVC and have a SPA experience within your MVC. So you can still work in your Knockout or your Angular or your Aurelia or whatever it is you want to use.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Just restart it. It suddenly starts rendering properly. Okay. So now I'm in this system. Let me just add a viewer. So again, remember we've got our dynamic content viewer, and I'm just going to add one here to the page if I can get my system to behave. Which, oh, wonderful. We don't know what that error is. It's completely unknown to us.
Yeah, I was muted, so you didn't hear me say that. That's my favorite error, the one that we don't know anything about.
Yes, it's just some random bit that popped up. I'll track that down after we're done here. It's a good thing we're still in CTP, right?
Yeah, and the with CTP, DCC, MPC, all of this stuff, like the explanation you went through in a moment ago, I just want to put it out there for the entire community. If you're listening to that and you're good at YouTube and video creation, if you make a funny remix of Joe talking about MVC, DCC, all this stuff, I'm going to give you a free license to Hotcakes. So, I'm just putting that out there.
You need DNN, MVC, SPA, and a DCC. Yeah. What you can't tell is that I used to be in the military, because hardly ever use acronyms in the military.
Yeah, and that's sarcasm.
Now you're starting to sound like Sheldon Cooper.
Sheldon Kubrick? Stanley Kubrick?
Or not Cooper.
Cohen? Sheldon?
Yeah, no, Cooper from Big Bang.
Oh, got it. Man.
Yes. Sheldon.
I went all
He always has to spell out when something's sarcasm.
Well, you know, some people just don't know.
Wow, wonderful.
Another unknown error?
No, this is not an unknown error. This is a screen sharing IIS slows down and doesn't want to cooperate. So because this site timed out while we were talking before, I had to re-log in, and that's what the unknown error was, by the way. The site had timed out, and it was trying to make a JavaScript call, and there was another error, and my guess is it was a error because it couldn't reach that endpoint because there was no user.
So that's a very good thing to talk about then, because part of this module development contest is to trap errors, correct?
Yeah.
So if we have an error like that, it's probably better to say, hey, we couldn't get the data, right? Or
Yeah.
please log in or something like that.
Yes, unknown error is not a great, I mean, it's great that we trap the error, but it's really bad UI to just say, we trapped some error. We don't know what in the hell it was, but we trapped it.
Figure it out.
Yeah. We've never seen this error before in our life, but we thought to pop up a dialogue for it.
Yeah, this should have been titled, whoops, this was completely unexpected.
It's like, I haven't talked to the server for 20 minutes and it's mad at me and refuses to talk back.
Yeah, well, you know, sometimes your app gets jealous. Oh, here we go. Quick settings.
So quick settings. So one of the things that we're changing, or that we're adding a new capability in DNN 8. And one of the things that we know is, like, when you drop a module on a page, the very first thing you always have to do is go in and configure the module, right? I dropped a module on the page. The very first step is go in and configure a module. And the challenge we have is traditionally in DNN, when you've done that, you've had to then go, you've had to go in here. Seriously, Firefox. Oh, great. Display driver crashed.
It's ironic. On our end, we see a black screen except for the display driver error.
Yeah. So
apparently the display driver is at least partially working.
Yes. I find that, I mean, I am glad that Windows 10 actually recovers from that fairly well. So, so this is why we don't want to go through traditional settings, right? Because it can take a little while to pull up, and then you present the user with basic settings, advanced settings, added to pages, permissions, page settings, which has basic settings and cache settings and advanced settings. And then you might have module specific settings, right? This is a lot to throw at a user when they just drop a module on the page, right? So we wanted something that was lighter weight, that module developers could take advantage of, and it's what we're calling quick settings. And I can always get back to quick settings if a module has it, right? It's going to be in my module actions menu, and that'll open up and show me, hey, you can make a couple of changes here, some module specific changes, and reconfigure the module. So in the case of the dynamic content module, I might want to set what the content type is. So let's say I'm wanting to edit an employee, create a new employee. And then we have view templates and edit templates. It's not important right now what those are. Just know that we've got these ones that are auto-generated. And so then I could save or cancel. So if we think about this quick settings, right? This is just a little UI with save and cancel. Same thing we do traditionally on the server side with our settings control. And then if I save it, it's going to go and it's going to re-render the content area here. It's supposed to. There we go. It didn't do a full page refresh. It just did it in line. And so what we want to do is expose this functionality to give us this quick settings page, quick settings view right here, and make that available to every module developer.
So I know we want to kind of show like what that looks like in the code, but real quick, when I'm a user and I add that module to the page, how do I know whether I should go to the edit pencil or to the quick settings, or is that something that the module developer should be responsible for and make sure there's a good experience for?
The module developer is responsible ultimately for the experience. What we're trying to do is provide building blocks for module developers that can give people a good experience as to where they want their users setting up settings, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really want to get away from, and part of the thing that drove that quick settings was in the dynamic content creator specifically, we knew that the minute you drop this thing on the page, I can't really show you anything until you tell me what the content type is and what views to use, right? Now I can make some assumptions, and we do have, if you saw the original content that was up there, that's some boilerplate getting started content. But what we really wanted was this thing to say, hey, first thing out of the box, just go set these settings and then you're ready to go, right? If you go look at the form and list, it has a slightly different way of accomplishing the same thing. It basically shows you some content and says, this module's not configured. Click this button. We'll take you over to the settings page and let you start configuring it. I know some vendors have something under this other module action menu, and we still have some bugs here in CDP6 with this menu. We'll get those ironed out. I know some vendors have something under the edit or the edit area, right? Some vendors put it under settings, and so you go and have to dive into settings. And some vendors build their own toolbar within their module, right? So,
or even put like a getting started thing up there. Like, I know that you haven't set this up yet, so here's the settings right here, or stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of approaches.
Yeah, there are a lot of approaches. Ultimately, we wanted a certain experience for the dynamic content viewer. There are some other things that we haven't completed yet that will be coming. So when you drop a module on the page in DNN 8 in the final version, control panel will automatically close back up. Not many people will drop, a module and then go back up to the control panel and drop a second module and a third and a fourth, right? Normally you drop a module on the page, you configure it, and then you move on to the next one. So it's the workflow is effectively going to be add a module. When you drag that to the page, we'll close down this and show you quick settings if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then we'll just show you the module, and it's up to that module.
So hold on a second. Did I hear that right? So somebody drags a module to the page, the module gets dropped, and the quick settings menu automatically opens?
Yes, if they're using quick settings, yes, quick settings will automatically open and basically say, hey, here's the settings for this module that you need to set for us to be able to start using it. Because the experience 99 times out of 100 is that when you drop a module on the page, the very next step that you do is to go and set the settings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we want that to be, if we know that that's what you're going to do every time, we want that just to come up automatically.
Sure. So let's see how that's put together.
Yeah. So quick settings. So we'll start from the the manifest file again. And so traditionally we've had certain different types of settings. So control key. So this is our view, our normal view control here, or for our module control. We have a second one here that's a edit, right? So this is when you go to edit content. This is where that view is. And then this final one is quick settings, right? So it's all driven off this control key. So if this had been settings, then this thing would get rendered in the traditional module settings area, right? Under this thing, right? If we have quick settings here, then it's going to get rendered right here as a quick settings area, right? And so now we have some conventions when you're a regular settings module or a settings view about how you set that up. And in normal ASCXs, right, there's certain events or methods that you define in your control, and then the system will call you at the appropriate time when those are ready, or when you need to load or when you need to save, right? So if I come here into my settings, and I go to my HTML, right? So if I say replace tokens, when I hit update or I hit cancel, that's going to call back into my code behind into predefined methods that are responsible for handling update and handling, or not the cancel, it's for the update and the load, right? So there's one that says what to do when to load, and there's one that says what to do when to update, and the system says what to do when you cancel or when you delete, right? Your module doesn't have any say in these two methods. So it's load and update. With quick settings, it's a little bit different, but not much. With quick settings, we want to give your view here, we want to give it control over what happens with save and what happens with cancel. And so we actually have within the quick view or quick settings itself. So we'll define this as a quick settings control, and then let's go into our settings here. And then we have a number of, so this is basically saying how to render out, right? So I've got render the content type, render the view template, and the edit template lists, right? So that's those three pieces: the content type, the view template, the edit template, right? So this is just standard Razor script. We have some usings up above. We have our model. So all of this is MVC style, but it's very similar in the SPA. We register a couple of scripts on the page. He's using this thing called DNN utility. That's probably going to go away in the final, so I'm not going to. And then he renders some other JavaScript here, this quick settings JavaScript. And that's the one that's important for him. So all of this is just wiring up a couple of things. This is specific to the way Charles coded this. There's nothing here that's like uber critical for quick settings.
Yeah, so everybody can do that their own way based upon their needs.
Yeah. So the important part is when you go inside this quick settings area. So this is that quick settings JavaScript that he had. So we'll go in here and take a look at that. And when you dig down through here in this initialize area, so this is where it's important. So don't worry about all of this other knockout stuff here. This is all just specific to what view engine he's using to render all of that stuff. The thing that's most important, he's got a save settings method. And so this one is important because what he's doing, and this is the important part, he's jQuery. We've defined a helper function within DNN called DNN quick settings. And you can pass in a module ID that tells it what module to associate the quick settings with and what to do on save. So when someone hits a save button, and then you can also pass in what to do on cancel. And you could say, you know, cancel settings. You don't have to pass that in. It's not a requirement. Obviously, you need to wire up on save because the system needs to know how to save, right? And then all that happens is the JavaScript in that behind this button gets wired up to say, okay, we're going to call your save settings function whenever that save button is pressed. And then it's up to you to read the values off the page and do whatever you're going to do. Now here, he's actually calling back in, calling some JavaScript in the back end. But if you were doing this in Angular or whatever, you would use whatever Ajax method are appropriate for your front end, right?
Yeah.
So the thing to know is that even though we're using MVC to render this, and you could render this in MVC or HTML or ASCX, even though we're rendering the page in MVC, ASCX, or whatever, this save and cancel is expecting that to be all client side. So you still need to wire up some JavaScript to then be able to make an Ajax call to actually save this data. Okay, so this is basically client side settings, right? So we can get a rich Ajax experience. This other one is basically a server side approach to settings. And
so when you do that, so you have that wired up client side. So it's always calling the quick setting, the DNN quick setting method. I'm assuming that the DNN quick setting method is what's responsible for only updating that one section of the page. Is that what's happening?
This isn't responsible for updating the section of the page. It's responsible for giving you the callback when someone presses the button. It's up to you to figure out how you want to, right? So he does that here. So he refreshes the templates.
Okay. Okay. So he uses this.
And he updates this content up here based on that refresh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference. So one of the requirements we had in DCC was when someone hits save, I need to refresh my page, right?
Yep.
So what we're trying to get to, or where we're ultimately going in DNN, is trying to make, whether you're using web forms or MVC or SPA type, we want you to be able to use and feel comfortable using more lightweight client-side approaches to building what has traditionally been very server-centric features in DNN, right? And so we're trying to give you some of those client-centric feature, take the server-centric feature, reimagine it in a way that you can use it more client-side, lightweight approach to things. And for whatever reason, I can see that that you're not really seeing my code at the moment, right? You're seeing the browser still?
No, I'm seeing Visual Studio.
Okay, it's weird. It's my Google Hangouts must have crashed a little bit here, so we'll see how everything's working. Hopefully, it's recording everything.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Oh no. There is a separate present to everyone button, or maybe not. So I don't know. We'll have to see if it's actually recorded.
I just got a notification that now you're presenting to everyone. We might have to do this over again, Joe.
We might have to do this over again.
Well, we'll find out.
We'll find out. We'll see. It's actually a good session to do over again. It'll give us some time to hopefully get Visual Studio and the browser working correctly.
Yeah, but I had a lot of great questions, and I'm not going to be able to remember again. I'm going to have to write them all down.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll call this a practice run.
Yeah.
Those people who saw it, they'll have a great practice run, and we'll see. you know, this screen sharing stuff seems to be, sometimes they ask you to present to everyone and sometimes they don't, and I don't get why. But
Yeah. Anyhow, so anything else we need to see for right now?
no, I think that's it. I think that gives you a really good overview and gives you enough for MVC modules. And unfortunately, you know, not all of our developers are comfortable with SPA modules or SPA development, and not all of them are comfortable with MVC development. But if you're interested in MVC development or interested in developing Ajax-based modules, then these two module types, I think, are a really good place for you to start to do that. Obviously, there are ways to do similar things without our frameworks. We're trying to make this, and hopefully you can see both from last week and this week that the development that we're doing is really trying to make it as comfortable for DNN developers as possible to move into this new world, while also being somewhat comfortable for traditional web developers who may be doing SPA or MVC today to move into the DNN world, right? It's not going to be 100% the same for everybody, and we're going to kind of meet in the middle, if you will, in terms of development approaches. So that's all I've got for today, Will. Let me go ahead and stop my screen sharing if Google Hangouts will let me.
If there was anything to stop. So yeah, so I think this is a great session, and like I've looked at that code behind before, but I feel like I have a much better understanding about it. And the one cool thing out of this, like, you know, with me being plugged in a little bit as an MVP and stuff, like a lot of this isn't new to me, obviously, but one thing that I found really cool was the quick setting usability feature of when you add the module to the page, it pops down. I like that that idea of that a lot. I can see that being very beneficial.
That's one area where I know we still have some bugs and we're working through those. As you saw, sometimes it stays open or sometimes it closes when we don't want it to. But we'll get all those worked out before the final release. Hopefully those will be worked out here in the next week or so. We've got a sprint, you know, and this is a good time to talk about, you know, a little bit about DNN 8. So as you can tell today, we're still continuing development on DNN 8. None of that's changed this week. I know there are some things going on in DNN Corp in terms of you know, people who are here and people who left recently. But as far as our commitment and everything to DNN 8, that's as strong as ever. We actually have the entire engineering team this week working on DNN 8 and helping to get things in shape. So I'm looking forward over the next couple of weeks seeing some of this stuff really start to solidify. I think MVC and SPA development right now are really fairly solid. There's still some edge case and, you know, things here and there that we need to work on, but overall, I think the experience that we have, and, you know, I can't say enough how much Charles has worked on this stuff over the last couple of months, and, you know, this is really a testament to the effort Charles put in to build out the MVC and SPA framework. So kudos to him for sure.
Yeah, we all wish Charles well. Like over the years, there's not, I don't think it can be said enough, like how much he's contributed to the community, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, we could spend a long time on that, I think. But as far as like now that we've seen SPA and we've seen MVC, and we see how that works, and it looks pretty much like very straightforward. And again, like you said, it's a testament. But how does that affect us for ASP.NET V Next?
Yeah, so the same concepts that we're using now. So part of the reason for building out SPA and building out MVC, and I didn't talk about it before, was really to get us ready for when we start on VNext. Now, we're not ready to do that yet. We've still got a lot of work to do for DNN 8, and we're really sort of heads down and focused on, let's get DNN 8 out the door. Let's not lose in chasing after the new thing, which I very much want to do, we can't lose sight of the fact that we still have a lot of customers and a lot of users out there. There's still a lot we can do on the DNN platform. And so we're really focused on get a great experience with these two module types, because when we do start on DNN Next, at whatever point that happens, these are sort of the bridge technologies to get us to DNN Next, right? So that if you're building on MVC or you're building on SPA, that you already will be familiar with the new development types, right? And even if you never move to DNN Next, you can still be very, very modern in your development approach, right? By using SPA or using MVC, they lend themselves very well to unit testing and to dependency injection and all of the more modern development approaches and development techniques that we use today. So that's really sort of our goal here, is to bring some of that modernity to the DNN platform and give people some choices in how they want to develop for DNN.
I'm no English major, but did you just make up a word?
No.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, go look it up.
All right, no. All right, cool, Joe. I don't have anything else. This was fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. And we'll see if we have to do this again on Monday.
Yeah, and if we do, oh well.
We'll figure it out. One of these days, we'll get the hang of the Google Hangouts.
Yeah, as long as they stop changing it on us.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks everyone, and we'll see you all at the next Hangout.
Yep.
Thanks,
everybody. Bye.
I don't have a button to stop this thing.
Really?
With all the browser crashes, it is removed.
I don't have a button to stop it either.
I may have to go out and come back in, Will. This is
Why don't you do that? Because I'm afraid for you to like completely close it, because that might like do something.
We're going to end up with an 8-hour recording of nothing but blank space.
Oh, that could be it too.
Wait, no, I resized the screen and suddenly UI is popping up here. So now we can hang out. So here we go. We're out of here. 1, 2, 3.